vibration, because they feel that that is the best way that they can respond to the onslaught of Kali Yuga. So similarly, ourselves, we are gathering together to hear the message of Srimad Bhagavatam in order to respond to the onslaught of Kali Yuga, both within and without. So the Kali Yuga is raging outside in the world around us, and it's raging in the hearts within us. At least I can speak for myself. I see some very advanced souls here, so that may not be the case for them. And so the antidote, the panacea for the onslaught of Kali Yuga in our hearts is the coming together collectively to hear the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, the way that the sages Naimisharanya did. And it's very interesting that Parikshit Maharaj, the main receiver of knowledge in the Srimad Bhagavatam, went to sit on the banks of the Ganga to hear from Shukadev Goswami. But many, many, many other devotees and great souls and saints came to hear that message also, so that he would be able to hear that message in the association of devotees. And so if Parikshit Maharaj was just sitting quietly and privately on the bank of the Ganga with Shukadev Goswami, it may or may not have had the same effect. But when we hear in the association of devotees, there's a collective power that takes place. So we gather here in the morning so that we can benefit from each other's association, even if it be virtually. So thank you all for coming together and performing that service to each other by allowing us to hear in the association of devotees. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can look at the verse and purports together. We're going to be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 9, canto 9, verse 6, text 1. We're going to read two verses because the first verse doesn't have a purport. So we'll read the first verse and then we'll read the second verse with its purport. So verse 1. It's a new chapter. This chapter is entitled The Downfall of Sobhari Muni. Okay. Shri Shuka Vacha Virupaketuman Shambur Ambarisha Shutastraya Virupat Prishadasvo Bhut Tatputrastu Ratitara. Shukadev Goswami said, O Maharaj Parikshit, Ambarish had three sons named Virupa, Ketuman, and Shambhu. From Virupa came a son named Prishadashva, and from Prishadashva came a son named Ratitara. So we've heard much the story of Ambarish Maharaj and his exalted story, and now we're hearing about his descendants. Oh, Govinda Krishna. And we're hearing about his sons and his grandson and his great-great-grandson. So he had a son, Virupa. He had three sons. Then I imagine that Virupa was the oldest because he's being mentioned first. And Virupa had a son, and Prishadashva had a son named Ratitara. So this is the Ambarish Maharaj and his son and his grandson and his great-grandson. So several generations down. Ratitara is the great-grandson of Ambarish Maharaj. Text 2. Ratitarasya prajasya bharyayam tantavertaha angira janayamasha brahmavarchas vinasutam. Translation and purport. I'm just going to warn everybody here that this verse and purport, it's a challenging one. It's a challenging one. Most, if not everybody, may feel a little disturbed by it. And my request is that we work through it together. Yeah, I'm just giving that heads up. It's a little intense in terms of the way that it depicts roles of people in society. And so we're going to read it. I'm going to share a little bit about my immediate response to it. We're going to look and pull ourselves back a little bit more and try to understand a broader context of the verse even at that time. And then we'll also look and see what it means for us today and how it may affect the way that we approach our spiritual lives and understanding of Shastra. So just putting that out there. Okay. Verse. Ratitara had no sons. So at that time, a son was required in order to take up the throne. It was a succession of, it was a monarchy of kings. So you needed a son to succeed the throne. Ratitara had no sons, and therefore he requested the great sage Angira to beget sons for him. So Ratitara was not able to produce sons. Maybe he was infertile. And so therefore he requested a great sage to please beget sons on his behalf, like surrogate children. So because of this request, Angira begot sons in the womb of Ratitara's wife. All these sons were born with Brahminical prowess. So Ratitara was not able to beget sons in the womb of his wife. So he asked a great sage to please beget sons on his behalf. Not completely different. I mean, not completely dissimilar to when in the Mahabharata, when Maharaj, who was it that passed away? Was it Vichitravira and Shantanu passed away, I believe? And Vedavyas was invited in to beget sons in the womb of his widowed wives to come and carry on and continue the dynasty. Except in this case, Ratitara was still alive, and because they were a Kshatriya family and Angira was a Brahmin, there was a mist of caste, and therefore Angira, the Brahminical prowess, was impregnated into the children. No, that's not the intense part of the verse. We're going to get into the purport. So I'm just going to read it, and then we're going to go from there. Hare Krishna, purport. In the Vedic age, a man was sometimes called upon to beget sons in the womb of a lesser man's wife for the sake of better progeny. When he says lesser man, he means somebody lower on the socioeconomic or ladder of, meaning like a Brahmin towards a Kshatriya or a Kshatriya to a Vaishya. And so in this case, a Brahmin with a Kshatriya family. In such an instance, the woman is compared to an agricultural field. And so, for example, the womb of a mother is compared to an agricultural field where just like the rains will soil the field and produce crops, similarly, the insemination of a man will impregnate the womb of a woman, and the progeny of human beings will develop. So in such an instance, the woman is compared to an agricultural field. A person possessing an agricultural field may employ another person to produce grains from it. But because the grains are produced from the land, they are considered the property of the owner of the land. So somebody owns land, and another person, person who owns that land is not able to till that field and grow crops. They might invite somebody else to come and please produce crops from this land. Similarly, a woman was sometimes allowed to be impregnated by someone other than her husband, but the sons born of her would become her husband's son. Such sons were called Chetra Jata. Because Ratitara had no sons, he took advantage of this method. So we have the instance where Ratitara was not able to produce sons. He invited Angira, and Prabhupada's comparing to the analogy of like an agricultural field. Now, this verse, in some ways, logistically, we can understand it, makes sense. We may not agree with it. And I will mention that the challenge that comes across with a purport like this is that Prabhupada is mentioning that a person possesses an agricultural field and invites another person to produce grains from it. It implies that a man may own the property of a woman and invite another person. Like, I'm wondering, was Ratitara's wife consulted in this situation? Like, was she also, like, you don't ask the land If another person can come produce grains, was the wife consulted in this? Like, did that dialogue take place? A woman was allowed to be impregnated by another other than her husband, and the sons born of her would then become her husband's son. So I will mention off from the bat that there is a discomfort that I feel being a man trying to explain verses like this. Sometimes when I give classes, I'll read verses or I'll read purports that talk about women in a way that is less than flattering, or is challenging to a woman's sense of identity. And as a man, I always feel a little, if not completely, disqualified to try to explain that, because I'll never know in this life what it's like for a woman to read a verse like this or other verses. And so I think it would be inappropriate for me to try to contextualize in a way and let people know how they should feel when they read verses like this. But at the same time, the service I am given is to speak on this verse in purport and to try to share my understanding of the context of it. And the first thing that comes to my mind, you know, when I read something like this, is the idea that, well, first of all, I usually don't always read verses before I give class, but just last night I happened to look at this verse before going to bed so I could ruminate it on in my mind. And what came to my mind was this idea of society and cultural and society roles only work together as a cohesive unit. So I'm gonna I was gonna stop sharing my screen, but I'll leave it up. I was thinking, for example, of in the book of Ephesians in the Bible, there's a very controversial verse that mentions how wives should submit to their husbands, and that verse can be quoted often by men. See, the Bible says that a man is the head of the household, and that a wife should submit to the husband. What's often not quoted is the second part of that section of that verse that mentions that a man should love his wife the way that Christ loved the church. And how did Christ love the church? To the extent that he suffered and died. And so Krishna also mentions in the last instruction of the Bhagavad Gita 1866, Sarva Dharman Pratyaya Mam Ekam Shararam Braja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayishami Ma Suchaha. That abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. So this surrender unto me, Krishna's mentioning, can oftentimes have a negative context, surrendering unto another person. But Krishna follows up that phrase by saying, I will deliver you from all sinful reactions. I will protect you. Do not fear. So this idea of submission, or this idea of being part of a social collective body, requires everybody to be on a very high level of consciousness. And that when everybody's on a very high level of consciousness, we recognize that nothing actually belongs to me. And that when I look at other people, I recognize that this person's not a man or woman. And that nothing belongs to me because everything belongs to Krishna. And that this body does not even belong to me, that it's on loan. I'm just renting this property of my body in the same way that I'm renting an apartment right now in Brooklyn, New York. And I'm renting the space that I live in, knowing that at a certain point, I'm moving on and moving out, whether I move apartments, whether I get kicked out, or at a certain point, death comes and I have to leave and move on. And the Uttama Adhikari, the highest level of, a Kanishta Adhikari, only sees the presence of the Lord in the deed in the temple, but doesn't recognize how to treat people around him or her, not recognizing that in the same way the Supreme Absolute Truth lives in the form of the body of the deity, that same Supreme Absolute Truth lives in the hearts of all living beings. And so they miss that point. And so they know how to treat the deity, but they don't know how to treat people around them. A Madhyamadikari understands the distinctions between different people and knows how to relate to people who are favorable to Krishna consciousness, not favorable to seniors, to juniors, to equals, etc. Anuttama Adhikari thinks that everyone's a devotee but me. Everyone is a devotee but me. Srila Prabhupada was once talking about different classes of society, first class, second class, third class, fourth class, and somebody stood up and said, and I bet you think that you're a first class man. And the way the story is told by Prabhupada's disciples, that Srila Prabhupada got very, almost sheepish in nature and became kind of somber and put his head down and almost got a little embarrassed. And he said, not because he'd been caught thinking he's a fifth class man, but because he said, actually, no. He said, I'm actually a fifth class man because I'm the servant of everybody. And so Srila Prabhupada saw himself in that place, in that position. And therefore, a generation of people that said, don't trust anybody over 30, surrendered their lives to somebody who is more than twice the age of 30. Because they saw that his love and his care, that he had actually transcended the bodily designation. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada can make statements either sometimes in his classes or in his purports that seem to be very confusing or disturbing on a physical level according to designation of gender or sexuality. Yet Srila Prabhupada had people of all races, all genders, all ages, all ethnicities, sexualities, surrendering to him and feeling loved and cared for because of the way that he went about his life and the way that he treated people. And so sometimes we quote things, I wouldn't even say out of context, but do I have the adhikar to actually say something like that to another person about their role in society, about their designation as a human being? Do I have the adhikar? Because unless I've personally transcended bodily designations, I don't. And if I'm still stuck in bodily designations, then I may be quoting half of the verse but not living up to the other. I'm trying to be Krishna and saying surrender unto me, but I don't have the adhikar to moksha ima shuchaha, to deliver them and to release them from fear. And so it's really important for us to recognize that some of these principles only exist in a certain high level of consciousness in order for us to understand exactly how I can look beyond it. So that's one thing that comes to my mind when reading verses like this. And in today's world, when we don't have that shared understanding of consciousness, it becomes non-applicable in some ways, because it's like a recipe when you're missing the main ingredients. You're no longer going to get that desired result. I'm trying to bake a cake and have no baking powder or baking soda or sugar or vanilla. I just have flour. You're just going to have a bowl of dough. And so the most important thing I find when I come across challenging verses that challenge my identity or the identity of other people's, rather than trying to dig into the nitty gritty of is this right or wrong or true or not, what I try to do is dig into my own spiritual integrity as a person. And how could I actually, because Krishna doesn't say surrender unto me so that I can exploit you. I mean, there's a very interesting verse in the Bhagavad Gita itself that talks about this very thing, about the nature of the living entities in the material world in the 7th chapter. Krishna mentions that he gives this ontology of the universe, and he talks about how he's going to explain everything. So he talks about the material energies. He says earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. Altogether, these 8 constitute my separated material energy. So Krishna has separate material energy that exists of earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. That's a separated material energy. And he says, besides these, O mighty Arjuna, there's another superior energy of mine, which comprises the living entities. So there's the material energy, and there's the energy of the living being, which is different. So we should know we are not of this material world. We are separate from it. The body, the mind, the intelligence, the false ego, the matrix, the world that we live in, all of that is separate from who we are as a living being, comprised of a living entity, who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. So when we think that we're superior to something, our material consciousness causes us to try to exploit it. Whereas in spiritual consciousness, when something seems inferior, which in actuality it's not, because it only is inferior on a material level, material consciousness. But according to our designation, if something seems superior or inferior, regardless of our situation, we try to lift it up. And something that Ekavira Prabhu said so beautifully once is that we don't try to pick things up or pick people up, because that itself assumes a level of superiority, but rather we try to lift people up. So we come beneath and we come below and we act on the level of servants and we try to lift up. Just like Srila Prabhupada, I'm a fifth class person because I'm the servant of everybody. And so this mentality is paramount to devotional consciousness. How can I be the servant of everybody? How can I be the servant of everybody? That's the devotional consciousness. Rather than how can I exploit resources or exploit other people's identities? And so sometimes when we hear verses, whether it's in the book of Ephesians in the Bible that says that wives submit to their husbands. But what type of husband? Is that husband loving their wife the way that Christ loved the church? Where they have the best interest in mind and they're being guided by the Holy Spirit in the heart in order to pick up everybody and lift them up towards spiritual consciousness? Surrender unto Krishna. Why? Because Krishna will liberate us and Krishna will protect us and deliver us from fear. And so these words like surrender or even, religion or God, they get taken out of context because of our experiences in the material world. And so when we read verses like our verse today, the way that I try to apply it is recognize like, wow, I need to deepen my spiritual consciousness and my humility and my integrity of character in order for me to approach the way that I treat other people. And I think that that is what's most essential for us to understand and for us to navigate. Okay. That's what I got for right now. I'd love to invite any questions or feedback. I'm looking at the chat. It's just verses.
Hare Krishna. Oh, is there somebody in the chat?
No, I didn't get anything in chat. Go for it, Gail.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand. You mentioned Ekavira Prabhu's statement that we don't try to pick people up, we try to lift them up.
Yep.
So I wasn't clear on the understanding of how you lift people up without the sense of superiority, which is why he didn't like the word pick people up. So what's the distinction there between picking somebody up, lifting somebody up?
Yeah, it's a good point. Part of the way that he mentioned in the context is that he was speaking with his guru Bhakti Tirtha Swami while he was still on the planet. He was talking about the idea of, as a counselor of other people, sometimes you counsel other people and you look after other people. And sometimes you would say, sometimes people that you're counseling think that they're more advanced than you, or sometimes it may even seem like you're counseling people is in the context of a mentorship meeting. And, I have the experience that sometimes I'm mentoring people and I'm like, these people are more advanced than me. Like, how am I mentoring them? Like, they're so sincere and they're so, they're in their development. And he brought a similar sentiment to Bhakti Tirtha Swami. Bhakti Tirtha Swami said, hey, Kabir, come here, I want to tell you something. He said, everyone's more advanced than you. And so he understood, it's like, oh my gosh, I should see that actually everyone's more advanced than me. But sometimes I have to play the role of a teacher. I have to play the role of a caretaker, to play the role of a mother or a father or a husband or a wife or a brother or a sister, whatever. I'm playing that role, but actually I'm the servant of everybody. And so to lift somebody up means, what does it mean for me to see look at Krishna, Partha Sarthi, the chariot driver of Arjuna, submitted himself to serve his devotee. And so what does it mean for me to actually see myself, even if I'm in a superior position, I'm actually the servant of this person? That's the consciousness of what he's referring to, is that actually I'm the servant of this individual. And I'm willing to even put myself below them in a way to lift them up. In the way that Krishna submitted himself as Partha Sarthi, as the chariot driver of his devotee Arjuna. I'm not here to put other people in their place. I'm here to serve them in whatever capacity I can, even if it comes at the expense of my own ego.
Wow, that's like a kind of really fine line to kind of navigate. I don't know if fine line is the right word to use, but if you are in, let's say, a mentor position, right? Whether you're a teacher or a parent or a mentor,
Yeah.
and you are, and you do in that role, you do have superior, let's say, knowledge, right? So to not see yourself as superior because of your superior knowledge, I think is probably the challenge, right?
It's extremely challenging. Yeah. There's a couple of verses that come to mind. First of all, there's the 15th verse of 15th chapter, Sarvastichaham Brivisani Vishto Matas Mritirganam Apohanam Cha Vedaischa Sarver Ahame Vividyo Vedantagrit Vedavachaham. And Krishna says, I'm seated in the heart of all living beings, and from me come knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So from me come knowledge, remembrance, forgiveness. Whatever you have that makes you think that you're superior is a gift. And it can also be taken away. And one of my most favorite verses from Shastra, I'm going to pull up this verse. It's from the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 15, where Arjuna is speaking to his brother Yudhisthira just after the disappearance of Krishna. And Maharaj Yudhisthira is trying to tease out, like, why are you so morose here, Arjuna? And he realized it must be because Krishna's left the planet. And there's a beautiful verse. I'm going to share the screen and show you. Tadvaidanus Ishava Sarato Hayaste Soham Rati Nirpatayor Gita Anamanti Sarvam Kshanena Taradbut Ashar Ishariktam Pashmam Hutam Kuhakara Dhamivoptam Usyam. So this is Arjuna speaking. I have the very same Gandiva bow, the same arrows, the same chariot drawn by the same horses, and I use them as the same Arjuna to whom all the kings offer their due respect. So nothing's changed about me. I've got all my weapons, I've got all my knowledge, I've got everything. Everything that made me such a great warrior, that I was so exalted about, people would bow to me and offer their respects, and I was revered as the greatest warrior. I got all of it. But in the absence of Lord Krishna, all of them at a moment's notice have become null and void, meaning it's meaningless without Krishna's. Is exactly like offering clarified butter on ashes, accumulating money with a magic wand, or sowing seeds on barren land. And I'm just going to read a little bit of Prabhupada's purport, or maybe the whole thing. It says, as we have discussed more than once, one should not be puffed up by borrowed plumes. So you want to think that you're superior to somebody? Yeah, there's a beautiful Urjaswat Prabhu, a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, bless his soul, has departed from this world pre-COVID a few years ago. He was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, and he would talk about ego. He'd talk about, sometimes people worry, like, I've got an ego, and how am I going to humble myself? He said, don't worry about it. Krishna will take care of that. Don't worry. If you're worried about becoming humble, don't worry. Krishna will take care of that for you. Don't worry. That will come. You know? If you think you're superior, Krishna will humble you. Your parent, Gail, I imagine being a parent has tested your patience and has humbled you at times, recognizing your limitations to control another living being. All energies in the purport, all energies and powers are derived from the Supreme Source, Lord Krishna, and they act as long as he desires, and they cease to function as soon as he withdraws. All electrical energies are received from the powerhouse, and as soon as the powerhouse stops supplying energies, the bulbs are of no use. I'm just a light bulb. I'm a light bulb. And if I'm not plugged into power source, I'm a useless piece of glass. But when I'm plugged into a power source, I can do amazing things. I can illuminate a room. We can illuminate the world. But we should not forget where we're getting our power from, and we should not forget that it can be taken away. And we should not forget how we are meant to use it in Krishna service. And the roles can easily be reversed. Roles can be reversed. In a moment's time, I'm reading the purport. Such energies can be generated or withdrawn by the supreme will of the Lord. Material civilization without the blessing of the Lord is child's play only. Isn't that accurate? Aren't we engaged? It's like a playground where little kids are hurling things at each other and calling them this and calling them. I mean, a playground is just like, it's a vicious but foolish place where people start to criticize each other and insult each other and think this person's better than that person. And as adults, and it just has a lot more dire consequences because you have the ability to hurt people a lot more. So you look what's going on in the world, and it's so childish, but it has dire consequences in terms of the racism and the religious bigotry that's going on, that's killing and murdering people. But that's what it is. It's literally people, it's little kids playing on a playground, but with deadly weapons.
The blessing of the Lord would be what?
What's that?
There. He said without the blessing
of the Lord is child's play only.
Well, I'll read the blessing of the Lord would mean
the blessing.
Yeah,
yeah. So as an example, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll read another verse from Bhagavad Gita to help answer that question. This is in the 13th chapter. 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna mentions, I gotta find this verse, where it talks about this is from the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna mentions that, yet in this body there is another, a transcendental joy, who is the Lord, the supreme proprietor, who exists as the overseer and permitter, and who is known as a super soul. And so, yet in this body there is another. So, Prabhupada himself, on the Jaladuta, when he came to America, he prayed, my dear Lord, I don't speak, this is not my native language. I do not know this culture. But you can infuse my words with power if you so desire. And so I'm giving this class right now. The way it impacts you is not up to me. It's Krishna within your heart, who is the other. He's in your heart, and he will inspire you to take what you need to take from this class. It's not me. My words can fall flat and have no impact on anybody. And you can walk away and think, that was a pretty dumb class. Why do they keep asking Doyal to speak? Or you can say, you know what? That was amazing. Or I heard something that touched me. And that's not me speaking. I could say that I could give the same exact class, and you can say that was dumb or that was amazing. And it's not even the words coming out of my mouth. It's the empowerment that is infused through Krishna's energy, coming from my heart through the words into your heart, inspiring you. It's the missing ingredient. We have prasadam distribution. What makes prasadam prasadam? It's Krishna's presence. When you eat prasadam, it infuses you with Krishna's presence. You taste prasadam and it can change a person's life. It's not the cumin or the cauliflower. Aloo gobi is not prasadam. It's Krishna's presence in that foodstuff. And so whether it's Krishna's presence in our words, Krishna's presence in our food, Krishna's presence in our activities. So I'm trying to serve my daughter or my wife or my father or my husband or my work or my society or my temple community. The way for it to take impact is that if Krishna allows the circumstances to first take place, and then he infuses. I sit down to lead kirtan. Is my kirtan going to inspire people or not? It's up to Krishna. It's up to me and how I approach it, but ultimately it's up to Krishna. But I can inspire Krishna to empower me and empower others. And so it's not so much in what I say and what I do, but it's how does Krishna empower me to do it? And Srila Prabhupada is the ultimate example. So we can see, for example, you're asking, going back to this verse, material civilization without the blessing of the Lord is child's play only. We could also see Srila Prabhupada and the way that he was able to enact global change. And similarly, also we can see, anything can change in a moment in the material world. I think the last year has taught us that very clearly. So there's that famous story I've quoted often where Srila Prabhupada was talking with a businessman who was showing Srila Prabhupada his factory and his business and saying, look how much I've done. I've built this business from scratch. I don't depend on anybody. I was given nothing, and I turned a business into my own, and I've made so much money. Srila Prabhupada said, what is your business? He said, I make glass. And Prabhupada said, what's the main ingredient in glass? It's sand. And he asked the man, where do you get your sand? He said, I get it from the beach. He said, oh, so you're a thief. He said, what? He's like, you're taking Krishna's sand and calling it your own? You're a thief. You haven't done anything on your own. So whatever we have, our intelligence, our material knowledge, it's a gift from Krishna, and Krishna empowers us to use it.
Well, that was an empowered answer. Thank you so much.
You are an empowered question asker. That is your avatar. That is your superpower. Yeah, thank you, Gail.
Thank you
we got
so
90
much.
left. I don't know if there's a closing comment or question, or if we should just end there.
There's a question by Gaur Kumar Prabhu in the chat.
Question by Gaur Kumar, yes. In theory, being a servant of everyone sounds wonderful, but in practice, this may not be easy as it can be burdensome unless one is very compassionate and advanced and mature. Srila Prabhupada. At our level, how do we slowly get to that stage of being mature servant leaders where we can lift others? So interesting, Gaur Kumar says question when I think he's the best example of that. So Gaur Kumar is the embodiment of humility, and you embody that more than others. So I see you was asking this question on our behalf because you're so humble yourself, Gaur Kumar. You know this answer in your heart because you live it. But for the rest of us, yes, I think it is very difficult. I love how the first part of the Lilamrita biography of Srila Prabhupada is called A Lifetime in Preparation. And so when you look at Srila Prabhupada's life, there is struggle. It's a tremendous struggle financially in his business and his family, feelings of failure according to his family and business, and really bringing himself to a state of complete dependence on the Lord. I mean, Srila Prabhupada is always Krishna conscious, but you can see his Krishna consciousness unfolding more and more throughout his life to the point where he made his way over here to America in the mood that he did it. And so I think it's important for us to be honest, because I think authenticity and transparency is the cornerstone or the foundation of that type of empowerment, to be that vessel. And so if we try to be something that we're not, that is the definition of hypocrisy, of falsity. And so I really think it depends on us first and foremost. I think that surrender also refers to the surrender of how we think we're supposed to be. Um, and so what I would say is the first stage is awareness. The first stage is awareness of where I fall short and where my growth edges are. And the second stage is a willingness to change. Am I willing to slowly start to have these things removed? And then a prayer to Krishna to give you the strength to do it on a timeline that works for you. But any of us can practice humility, at least to some extent. And so we should simply practice it to whatever degree we're able. We can speak more, but it's already 8:01. So I think we will end our time here. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Gorsharan, for facilitating all of these dialogues for all of us. Thank you, Adi
Excuse me.
for leading the example of sincere surrender and for inquiry and for desire to hear Krishna consciousness always by being with us. Thank you all so much. Srimad
Hare Krishna.
Oh, Hare Krishna. I'm getting a Hare Krishna from someone.
I had sent you a message.
Thank you. Did you email me or what?
No, in the chat. I wanted you to see it.
I don't see it. Oh, thank you. She said, to me, picking someone up indicates that they have fallen, leaving you in a superior position, able to pick them up yourself. Rather, one can give support in order to help them lift themselves up. Yes, thank you very much for that beautiful message. I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, this idea of not being superior to others. Hare Krishna. Okay. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.
Doyal Gauranga Prabhu ki jai. Thank you so much, bro.
Hari Hari Bol.
Okay.